It was 1888 and the cold this winter isn't taken any hostages. You can hear the madness in the wind, the bite it takes when the cold touching your exposed skin. The wind howled loudly, the cold felt like it was chiseling at your face. The hearth was trying to keep up with the chilly air. Thomas started with 1 cord of wood this winter. He has already went through half of the pile in 2 weeks. The temperature on the mercury thermometer read -5 degrees and dropping. Arlen and Daphne were huddled near the hearth with every piece of clothing on and every blanket around their shoulders. The log cabin had little tiny gaps, and the blistering wind made sure it found them all. They sat near the roaring flames, hearing the wind bang against their cabin. It sounded like the wind was knocking. Arlen found some newspaper and crumbled it, placed it in the gaps of the cabin walls. He then added some wet mud and dry clay over the newspapers. His hands and face were so cold and numb. The mud mixture seems to hold. After an hour of patching all the gaps Arlen could find, he sat next to Daphne, wrapped himself up, while trying to bring more heat into his cabin. His neighbors weren't going through anything like the Miltons. One family with a 2-story home roof has collapsed in on them. Unfortunately, no one was hurt or injured. But the next family wasn't so lucky. Their 7-year-old boy was holding his mom's hand and got free to go get his toy horse his grandfather carved. As the boy reached his toy horse, the roof above it collapsed on the boy. When they found him that spring, he was still holding the wooden toy horse. In Wyoming, the winters are ruthless. But the next winter will bring false spring, where the weather thinks it's spring and the cold is sitting on top of the horizon, and soon as the wind pushes the cold down the prairie, the old-timers were to come to call it the children's blizzard. As everyone thinks it's spring, it brought everyone out of their homes and caught them off guard. The cold was -15 degrees and the snow wasn't falling. It was flying horizontally fast, and as it hit your face it burned, not like fire burn but cold burn. The snowdrifts were 13 feet high. Some homes were buried under the snow. It took some families 3 to 4 hours to dig their way out. As Daphne wrapped up by the hearth trying to stop shivering, she remembered the girl in the hole, wondered if she was alive. Margret Mathews was her name. She was only 19 and dug a hole in the ground 8 feet deep, 5 feet wide, and 20 feet long. She had 4 chambers, 1 for sleeping quarters, her perversion, 3rd was for her garden, and the last one is the biggest chamber. It held 1 cow, 3 chickens, 1 goat, and a mule. Margret had big fist-sized tomatoes, green beans, potatoes, cabbage and onions in her garden. She has bison, deer, and rabbit meat drying above the garden, from the underground ceiling. The earth won't lie, people do. The earth will remember, people won't. Margret's folly, as they called it, held a steady 58 degrees inside, while the outside was a -15 degrees, now a difference of 73 degrees. Margret had no idea what her neighbors were going through. She didn't know the Johnson family roof collapsed in on them and the Williams lost their boy. Margret couldn't sleep knowing her neighbors may be hurt or worse, so she gathered some first aid supplies, water, food, for her neighbors. She had put every layer of clothes on, opened her door, and the cold slapped her so hard it almost gave her whiplash. The snow was waist deep. She reached her first neighbor after 30 minutes of walking. When Daphne opened her door, a cold ran past her face with such force like you owed it something. She saw the girl in the hole in front of her. Her eyes went big, stepped aside. Arlen stood up in shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Everyone thought you died out on the prairie. Margret didn't say anything. She handed her one of the sacks she prepared. Oh, said Daphne. The air in their cabin was cold. As Margret talked, she seen her own breath. I knew you'd need these, as everything is closed or destroyed. What about you? Asked Daphne. I have plenty, she added. Plenty, said Daphne. But how? You're in a hole. No, said Margret. I have a dugout that is 20 feet long, 8 feet deep and 5 feet wide. I have 4 chambers. I have a garden, a underground spring, a cow, chickens, and a goat, plus 1 mule. My dugout holds a steady temperature of 58 degrees without a heat source, and with fire it holds a steady 62 degrees. Your cabin is cold like you live in the cold. My dugout is warm. Your cabin have cracks where cold can get inside. My dugout doesn't. It had been 4 hours after walking in the deep snow to most of her neighbors before turning back. She put some medical supplies, few tomatoes, potatoes, 1 pound of flour, dried meat, veggies, salt pork in each sack for each family. When the harsh wind finally settled down, and the hard snow stopped gracefully falling, Sheriff heard about what the curious girl in the deep hole had done. The anxious men in the trading market thought she had broken the strict law. They mounted on their horses and followed the sheriff to the girl's hole in the ground. When they approached the hole, they seen smoke, steady smoke. It was gentle and can barely be seen. One of the men said, "I thought she died out here last summer." Another man announced, "So you're the one who started that rumor." That's when she heard it banging on her door to her dugout. She brushed her hands on her dress, walked to her door, opened it, and she seen a shadow figure above her. It was Sheriff Billmount. "Yes, Sheriff?" asked Margret. "I heard you helped 12 families with food, water, and medical supplies." "Yes," and Margret added, "How?" "When you live in a hole," said Billmount. "Come in," she said. They walked in and noticed the difference of temperature from outside. It was a little warmer, not hot but warmer. "Let me show you," she added. She showed them the garden and her animals. One of the men noticed how they're able to stand tall in her dugout. The sheriff asked, "How do you have a garden? It's -10 degrees outside." "I'm not outside, I'm underground," she said. Final thought on being a neighbor in 8. Being a good neighbor isn't just about proximity. It's about empathy and connection. When they have plenty to share, whether it's time, resources, or kindness, a neighbor have the opportunity to uplift those around them. It's in these acts of generosity that they discover their shared humanity. In the end, let's remember that every gesture, no matter how small, has the power to create ripples of positivity. As they check in on each other and lend a helping hand, they not only strengthen their bonds but also remind themselves that they are all part of something greater. Together, they can create a community where everyone feels seen, valued, and loved. They were the neighbors who made this a reality. Margret Mathews was a hero. She saved countless lives in the winter of 1888. That winter when Margret walked in a blizzard that was -25 degrees outside with snow waist deep. To make sure her neighbors have food, water, or medical supplies, the homesteaders faced brutal challenges: droughts, blizzards, tornadoes, plagues of pests like grasshoppers, loneliness. They struggled with breaking tough sod, lack of materials, protection from wildlife, and water, often battling starvation and disease. Thanks for watching an Amor Joy film, an LTD production, a film produced by Flipaclip. Characters: Margret Mathews, Arlen and Daphne Walton, the Williams, Sheriff Billmount, and the men at the trading post, Thomas Dillfield, and Billy Ileton, the Williams boy, Old Man Gunther. Animated by Extol Rose. Illustration by Crystal Hurst. Sound effects by Pixabay.com. Written by Crystal Taylor. Edited by Amor Joe. I'm your narrator. My name is Alyssa Kelly.